St. Vincent's PM, Ralph Gonsalves, he has also now joined the chorus of people saying, well, to some extent inaccurately, well, I don't know about St. Vincent, bring back the death penalty. He believes at the end of the day, look, there will be, we need to take this measure. Now, again, the debate is to what extent is it a deterrent? But I think coming out of the discussion, because I think it was either one professor criminologist, I can't remember his name right now, he did admit that the death penalty potentially still has a place. And this is where I begrudgingly have to agree. When you do not think that there is hope for rehabilitation, where there's most likely somebody who will be a repeat offender, and I don't know if life in prison is necessarily a punishment to a certain level of criminals.
Not necessarily. It is a punishment to you and I, because at the end of the day, even if we are struggling at home to pay our bills, we're still paying for those individuals to have 3 square meals, every day. Human rights people will argue, listen, the conditions within the prisons are absolutely appalling. So let's not discuss that in its entirety. But at the same time, the hangman never left. The hangman is on sabbatical, and we totally understand that. What is next is that whether or not legislative framework needs to be implemented or be in place in order to have hangings once more within that time period. Pratt and Morgan, a case of which we've spoken about innumerable times. In that particular sense, I've always questioned if Trinidad and Tobago, or by extension other Caribbean nations or Commonwealth nations, were to move away from the Caribbean Court of Justice, which they established, CCJ came out of CARICOM. No, if we move away from the Privy Council, our next, the court that we would sign to is CCJ. But CCJ has already stated...
They agree with...
Yeah, they're not necessarily in favor of the death penalty. We've heard that the death penalty is not a deterrent. It's a very weak deterrent, if anything. If the death penalty is to be once more practiced, because it still exists, if it is to be implemented and completely practiced, then you have to wonder if it's going to take legislative framework where we move away from these courts, establish a new court. I think that's the only way it's going to be sorted out, because 5 years for what? 2 or 3 claims?
But you're taking it's the same pool of judges that you'll be recruiting from. So it's not necessarily, it's like saying, well, the telecom provider is the same technician. So at some level, the customer service, the same pool of employees, it's going to be very similar. I agree in a sense, because the Prime Minister Gonsalves, he did say, not for crimes of passion, but murders. Right, and I think he means premeditated murders. That's what I think he's going for. I agree. It was, I believe, Douglas Mendes, right, that might have been the one to say it, that it's not a deterrent. And I think, yes, we've heard it before. Young men in crime now, they don't have a high life expectancy for themselves. So how is a death penalty in several years away going to deter them? But I do think that in the sense of, think about the Joel Chady case and his enforcer, right? Now, maybe you don't necessarily hang the entire gang, but the enforcer had a reputation, and this was a very bloody case. Do you expect serious chance to rehabilitate him? And I would say, in some cases, society might say, look, we rather just execute them, than trying to risk them, for whatever, in whatever way to continue, whether behind bars or out in the free world.
If you use Dolce as an example, and we speak about the death penalty, I have never heard a criminal lawyer argue for the death penalty. I have not heard a criminal lawyer in favor of the death penalty. I'd love to meet a criminal lawyer who actually has an argument for the death penalty to hear their side. But look at Ramesh Lawrence Mirage, for example. When he was a defense attorney prior to becoming the Attorney General, he was not in favor of the death penalty. He actually stood against it. He advocated against it. When he became the Attorney General, so now you're under the clothes of a politician, he actually went against his own arguments against the death penalty in order to push for Dolce to be hung. So this is the thing. Criminal lawyers might, and it ties back into what you're saying about a pool of judges, criminal lawyers might never be for the death penalty. Politicians could say easily on a platform, because again, it's just very easy to say, bring back the hangman.
Here's the thing. To some extent, if I'm a lawyer, my opinion is mine. If I'm a politician, technically, my opinion is not supposed to be just mine. So this is now the debate where, and it goes to the judiciary versus legislature. Where does the final say lie? Because if a democracy says, no, but at any day, we don't care what you think, judges, we want the death penalty, right? Is it ethically right for judges to say, well, no, it's unconstitutional? Whose constitution? At what point does the Constitution actually say that? And to be fair, there are human rights considerations because, again, it isn't a deterrent. So what is the point and the purpose? Is it just because we want to commit violence back on criminals? You know, there are a whole host of other problems with the criminal justice system, like the detection rate, which to some extent makes the death penalty a very moot point. But I do think, though, that is an interesting point where, depending on how things goes, for better or worse, if the public says we want this, and the high courts and the final courts of appeal are saying, no, you can't have it, to what extent is that democracy? It's a very tricky thing, and I'm not going to pretend to say I know the right answer.
Let me just conclude with this thought, and it's a provocative thought. An eye for an eye. Do you think that taking, and I've argued for the death penalty, I've argued against the death penalty. All right, I have not made my position clear because I like to debate all around. I like to look at every single angle. But do you think that taking the life of one individual, for them taking the life of another individual, is justifiable? An eye for an eye. And not necessarily for you to answer, but it's just for people to think about all around. We've argued for the death penalty. At the same time, if we're arguing for the death penalty, let's hear arguments against it, so we have a better understanding. Anyway, that's it for this particular segment on Talking Points. When we return from this commercial break, we'll get into your Cue This segment. Stay tuned to the program.